Deputy Horrigan.
I'm not sharing with anyone, just the one green to deal with. And thank you, Minister, for the update. Despite the implementation and further proposals for some of the largest collective stimulus measures in our history, it seems a partial recovery in 2021 is the best that we can be expecting. And so now is the time to act, but it's also a time to reflect on how we organise our economy and to find new ways to structure our economic activity. I'm very heartened to hear the Minister flag the need for new business models. Given the distress that many businesses now face and the increase in savings by individuals, the Green Party believes that the cooperative business model could and should provide a core part of our rebuilding efforts post-COVID-19. This model of community-based economic organisations ensures our business community is guided by the principles of economic democracy and that they are rooted in the interests of their locality. They offer not just a new source of financing for Irish businesses, but will help us build a better, more environmentally conscious, more equitable society. According to the IMF, the world economy will lose a cumulative 8.1 trillion in output due to COVID-19 over the next 2 years. This impact will be felt faster and harder than the 2008 financial crash. Our own economy is expected to contract by 6.8% this year. In a survey from Chambers Ireland, half of SMEs expect their revenue to decline by at least 60% over the next 3 months. 6 out of every 10 companies have been forced to seek a deferral on their overheads, mostly on payments to either landlords, banks or the Revenue Commissioner. This is an extraordinary disruption of economic activity. We are potentially heading into one of the worst recessions in our state's history. However, and as the Minister has pointed out, unlike previous recessions, we do have strategic national economic strengths to draw on. Though the nature of employment was variable, unemployment was low, economic growth was steady and consumer spending was strong. This economic downturn will be unlike anything before it. The collapse in consumer spending and the resultant cash flow problems this has resulted in for businesses were not the result of instability in our financial system or a collapse in a property bubble, but rather the result of social distancing restrictions and the consequential closing of our retailers, hospitality, businesses, offices and the like. Consumers are not spending because they are unable to spend. Instead, they are saving their money. Businesses are struggling with cash flow. Consumers are saving. We should take advantage of the situation. We propose we must look to the cooperative business model and begin to promote community-based economic organisations that focus on community wealth. This will not just provide a place for Irish savers to invest their money, but will provide a new source of financing. The cooperative business should be an integral part of rebuilding our economy post-COVID-19. Cooperatives are guided by principles of solidarity and economic democracy and are rooted within their local communities. They run according to the interests of their members, rather than some unknown and disconnected shareholder. Studies in the UK have shown cooperatives create higher profits than conventional businesses. They are more likely to survive their first 5 years of operation. And the 5 largest cooperatives in the UK paid 50% more corporate tax than Amazon, Facebook, Apple, eBay and Starbucks combined. Employees of cooperatives report higher levels of job satisfaction and economic well-being, as well as higher rates of productivity. Compared to conventional businesses, cooperatives also have lower levels of staff turnover, lower rates of pay inequality and lower rates of absenteeism. Cooperatives must form the foundation of our efforts as we move forward. They'd be better for workers, better for consumers and better for communities. So given this, the legal, regulatory, auditing and financial institutions of our economy are predominantly designed for private companies and tailored to their needs. By contrast, and as a result, cooperatives operate under a framework that disadvantages them, burdening them with a layer of rules and regulations that equivalent conventional firms do not face. Can the Minister speak to how he might address the competitive disadvantage faced by cooperatives? Could we consider and could he speak to introducing the right-to-own legislation to support employee buyouts and the cooperatisation of existing businesses? Further to this, I have some reports from constituents that are being advised by mortgage brokers to wait until 3 months after the last TWSS payment before applying for mortgages. Some have had approved mortgages pulled by pillar banks as they go to draw down the mortgage. I have other constituents who have issues with Rebuilding Ireland home loans, loans provided for people who have already been refused mortgages. While I appreciate that the banks need to be prudent in their lending, it's disheartening to see the banks we bailed out so quick to abandon mortgage applications. From the bank's perspective, I can understand that the uncertainty around the COVID payment and the temporary wage subsidy scheme may not help their decision-making process. Can the Minister advise when the Government will be in a position to provide a definitive view on what will happen to the COVID payment and the temporary wage subsidy in the months ahead? Finally, it is highly likely that there will be an increase in the level of personal insolvency and home repossession over the coming months. This is on top of the number of unresolved cases from the previous recession. There are a number of legislative and regulatory updates that can and should be made to facilitate the efficient and fair processing of any such insolvencies or home repossessions. However, in anticipation of an increased number of cases, the funding allocated to agencies and NGOs dealing with and advocating on behalf of those involved in personal insolvency and home repossession should be reviewed. Does the Minister have plans to review funding and supports allocated to the Legal Aid Board, money advice and budgeting services and FLAC? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy, for all of your questions, and I'll do my best to work through each of them in turn. The first one is to identify quite a few areas of agreement between us. I mean, the point that you make regarding this crisis being very different. Well, I'm going to get off to a good beginning, Deputy. I hope I can continue it with you, but we'll see. I mean, the description you have of this crisis is very accurate, and that this is very different to what has happened before, in that it is happening here in Ireland and across the world because of a public health decision that governments have taken and citizens are complying with. So it's so different to where we have been before. And the point that you made there regarding how savings have gone up and by how quickly they've gone up, you know, when we take a step back from the terrible harm that we're all grappling with at the moment and our efforts to repair it, you could see what is happening here as an economy that up to this crisis had been performing very well. In turn, that has now allowed the state to take the place of spending from the private sector, which is now translating into really high savings rates. And if the next government and this House was to be able to give confidence, which I believe we will be able to do so, regarding the future public health and economic health of our country, that very high savings rate at the moment and the ability of that to be spent in our shops and invested could be a very powerful force in what happens in our economy, even later on this year. But we have a number of bridges to cross before we get to that point. In relation to the different questions that you've put to me there, firstly, in relation to personal solvency legislation, the personal insolvency legislation that we have had at the moment has been successful to date in preventing many of the worst expectations that many had regarding what was going to happen in repossessions here in Ireland. I believe there's over 80,000 restructured loans in place, and over 85% of those loans are having their terms met. So I do believe at the moment, Deputy, that the personal insolvency legislation that we have in place is capable of dealing with the difficulties that we may lie ahead, but it does need to be reviewed. And we do need to consult with Insolvency Service Ireland to have a look at the framework that we have in place and make sure it's ready to be fair to everybody for the kind of challenges that could unfold. In relation to the question that you put to me there about income, I do and would respectfully make the case to you that I'm not sure the issue is the continuation of the wage subsidy scheme or PUP in the future that might be causing the difficulties that you've referred to in relation to the handling of loan applications. And I know the difficulties are real because I've experienced these cases myself. Instead, it is a concern that is being shown regarding the question of how quickly income will rebuild. And we all need to be in a place, and I know this is a very difficult and very sensitive matter for many, that if loans are given, that the person who's given the loan and the person who's receiving the loan are both confident the terms of that loan can be remet. Because you will remember the great difficulty that many entered into when it became clear that couldn't happen. I think there is a need for care now, but these issues have to be dealt with sensitively by banks who are dealing with families who are in situations they never thought they would be in. In relation to the cooperative model that you've referred to, we do have a credit union movement here in Ireland. And there may well, I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for you and I to discuss this matter later. But I want to issue again my welcome for anybody who wants to set up a different banking model here in Ireland. But if they want to set up a different banking model, they can't expect, with respect, the state to capitalise that. We have a credit union movement at the moment who, for example, I've met all the leaders of it now on 2 separate occasions since COVID began. They would understandably put the question to me, if we're making money available for a new banking model to be set up here in Ireland, why are we not making that money available to them? And if there are 4 organisations or entities that believe they can set up a different banking model here in Ireland, I know many, including the Central Bank and I, would be willing to engage with them on it. In terms of moving this forward, however, it has to be on the basis of their ability to fund it themselves, as is the case with the credit union movement. And then as a next step, Deputy, we do have, in the aftermath of a report that was done by Deputy Ring's department and I on the community banking model here in Ireland, we do have a consultant that's doing some work in this area for the Department of Finance and the Department of Community and Rural Affairs. And maybe we could use that as a process for dealing with the issue that you referred to.